Is there? Have you done that today? Or if you're not registering to vote, give me a ring and tell me why. That's coming up after 7:30. But first, Chuka Umunna.
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, European leaders are holding an emergency summit to address the migrant boat crisis as authorities tackle further emergencies in the Mediterranean. Italy and Malta are responding to distress calls from two boats with hundreds of people on board. Yesterday, it's thought up to 900 people lost their lives when a boat capsized off the coast of Libya. Liberal Democrat leader Nick Clegg says the UK government must help tackle the crisis.
We must go after hard after those illegal smugglers and traffickers who are profiting from the death of so many people out in the Mediterranean.
A British couple with 4 children, the youngest aged just 1, have been arrested in Turkey on suspicion of heading to Syria. The 6, who are from Berkshire, were last seen boarding a ferry from Dover to Calais earlier this month. Thames Valley Police says it's working with Turkish authorities to safeguard the family. An investigation has started into what caused a 6-storey building under demolition in central London to collapse this afternoon. 1 man was injured and 200 were evacuated from the Aldwych area. John Snellgrove from the London Fire Brigade has told LBC it could have been much more serious.
The centre of the building has collapsed, and if that had not collapsed into the courtyard area and had collapsed into the road, it's a fairly densely populated area of London, there could have been many more injuries.
A soldier has been jailed for 16 years for raping two women while they were on nights out with friends in London. Solomon Kurban, a former gunner in the British Army, attacked the women in 2003. It took police more than a decade to trace him using DNA tests. Nicola Sturgeon says any influence won by her party in the general election would be used to make the whole of the UK better for ordinary people. The Scottish National Party leader set out her manifesto, promising to end what she's calling the pain of Tory austerity. Labour has again ruled out a formal coalition with the Scottish nationalists. David Cameron says one would bankrupt the UK.
If Labour and the SNP get into power, you're going to see an alliance between a party that wants to spend, borrow and tax more with another party that wants to spend, borrow and tax even more. It might be a match made in heaven for them, but it is a match made in hell for the British economy.
A con man who escaped from prison after sending staff a fake email saying he'd been granted bail has been jailed for 7 years. Neil Moore posed as a court manager from Southwark Crown Court while he was on remand at Wandsworth Prison in southwest London for fraud offences. A ghost tube station last used 100 years ago has been uncovered during work on a £6.5 billion rail project. Southwark Park Station in South London only served passengers from 1902 to 1915 before it shut for good. LBC weather dry and clear tonight for London and the southeast, lows of 2 degrees. Dry for much of the UK with patchy cloud and fog spreading into eastern counties. The far north of Scotland will see some showers which could be heavy. Tomorrow a fine day with highs of 18 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Ros Unwin.
I'm Amy Solomon in the LBC Travel Centre. After the accident on the A13 in East London's Wennington earlier, heading towards London, you're still slow from North Stifford in Essex to the M25 at Lakeside. There are also delays along the arterial road from Meads Corner to Chandler's Corner, and the A127 slow from Romford to Gallows Corner into town. Coming east along the A13, you've got delays from Dagenham to Wennington as well. The M25, that's looking slow clockwise between junction 13 at Staines and 15 at the M4. Anti-clockwise is queuing between junction 1B at Dartford and 30 at Lakeside, so towards and through that Dartford tunnel. Now the southbound stretch of the M6 in Cheshire is still struggling. Long queues around junction 17 at Crewe after an accident involving a lorry earlier. The lanes are back open though. Westbound on the M62 in West Yorkshire's Oakenshaw, it looks as though things are starting to move better now between 26 at Chainbar and 25 at Brighouse. Keeping you moving, your next travel updates in 15 minutes.
LBC Travel.
With GoToMeeting. Work smarter with a free 30-day trial.
This is LBC, leading Britain's conversation. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. LBC's Election Call.
4 minutes past 7, you're listening to Ian Dale at Drive. This is LBC's Election Call. Every day during the campaign, we'll be giving you the chance to question a senior politician about what matters most to you. We're hearing from all the main parties as Britain decides. And for the next 30 minutes, it's the turn of Chuka Umunna, Labour's Shadow Business Secretary. You can watch us at lbc.co.uk and you can phone in with your questions on 0345 6060 973. Chuka, welcome back.
Good to be back.
How's the campaign going so far?
It's great, really enjoying it.
You actually enjoy election campaigns? Because some politicians hate them.
I enjoy getting out of Westminster. I think our politics is far too Westminster-centric. And so this is when our democracy comes alive. And it's a beautiful thing. It's great. And I spent lots of time in my own area, but also lots of other different parts of the country too, listening to people's questions, I hope answering them sufficiently and explaining to them Labour's offer.
Over the next 30 minutes. Let's crack on with the calls. Rob is in Putney. Hello, Rob.
Evening, gentlemen. Chuka, just wanted to say, is there a split between you and Ed Miliband introducing the 50 pence income tax top rate? You recently said I wouldn't want to raise it permanently because you didn't think you wanted to see the tax burden as low as possible. Yet there was a quote on 2010 leadership campaign when Ed Miliband said, quote, I keep the 50 pence rate permanently. It's not just about reducing the deficit, it's about fairness in our society. Is this a split?
The short answer to your question is no, absolutely not. And it's worth just reminding your listeners that I supported Ed's leadership campaign back in 2010 when he said those words. But what I said was that, look, I didn't go into politics to tax people, but I do think it's fair and reasonable to ask those who earn a huge amount. And good luck to them. They've worked hard for that. But I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the top 1%, which is what we're talking about here, to contribute a bit more, A, to help us reduce our debts and our deficit as a country, and B, to fund public services and to do the things that, in my capacity as Shadow Business Secretary, many businesses have told me we need to do to put our economy in a long-term footing, particular investment in skills and infrastructure.
So when Alistair Darling announced the 50p rate in his budget and said it was temporary, he wasn't telling the truth.
Well, it has at that point, obviously, it was just before the last general election. But the commitment we have at this general election with this manifesto is for it to carry on through the course of this Parliament.
Do you see it as permanent, like Ed Miliband does?
Well, that would be asking us to say what's going to be in our manifesto in 2020 and 2025.
Used the word permanent. Well, I mean, as we just heard from Rob.
Yeah, and he was right. He was right to do so.
So you don't see that ever coming down?
Well, I'm not going to, who knows what a Labour Chancellor will say in 2025. I never know, there might be a Tory one. I'm hoping not.
Well, it might be you as the Chancellor. I mean, Ed Miliband hasn't actually confirmed that Ed Balls will be the Chancellor. Ed Miliband could be you.
Ed Miliband has not confirmed who will be in any of the cabinet positions because he doesn't presume what the result of the general election is going to be.
Good answer. Rob, what would you like to come back on that?
I just wanted to know if there's any idea of how much it would raise, because the Institute of Fiscal Studies recently said that they thought it would be negligible. And, I'm just wondering whether or not corporations, lots of them seem to be skipping off paying tax and offshore funds, whether it would be fairer to actually go after the people with the broadest shoulders, which are corporations turning over billions.
Well, in fairness, actually, Rob, at the time that it was abolished, it was raising in the order of around £3 billion. But I don't think necessarily the two things that you're talking about are mutually exclusive. I do think both, it's not unreasonable to ask very, very wealthy individuals to contribute a bit more. And also, as I say to many of our businesses, look, and by the way, it's worth overwhelming majority of our businesses make a huge contribution to the exchequer in terms of the taxes that they pay, not just in corporation tax, but business rates and the rest. They make a huge contribution. But I think we can ask wealthy individuals and also some of these big global multinational companies to pay their fair share. And what a lot of them, Rob, actually I don't seem to realise is usually when we talk about the issue of avoidance, they will say, well, look, that's the fault of the politicians. You guys set the rules. You should make sure that they work to collect tax.
Why would anyone rich vote Labour?
Because not only do they want to see an economy growing sustainably in the long term with the right investment in our peoples and skills, we are one of the most unproductive economies in the G7. Only Japan has worse productivity than us. People who are wealthy want to see the country thrive and prosper and be productive. But also, there are lots of people who've done very well in this country who also want to see a fairer, more equal society. One thing that I thought was really interesting that I think illustrates that we don't live in isolation, and actually we can gate ourselves off with our wealth in our kind of gated complex, but ultimately we are all one, was the 2011 riots we saw in this country, because it didn't matter what your background was, what your creed, colour, race, religion, or how much money you had or how wealthy you were. You could not shut yourself off from what was going on around you at that time. Okay. And it just illustrated to me that we are one community. And so I think, that's why you do get a lot of people done well for themselves who want to put something back in. And that's a good thing.
Let's go to Ranjit, who's in Birmingham. Hi, Ranjit. What's your question for Chuka?
Hello, Mr. Umunna. Why do you think the Labour government has never left the economy in a better state than it found it?
Well, I don't agree with that. And if you look at
when did it leave it better?
Well, Ranjit, Anna, just a minute. You asked the question. Let me answer it. We obviously were elected. Let me answer the question. Then, by all means, come back. We obviously were elected in 1997. That was in most recent memory. And then we were re-elected in 2001 and 2005.
But you
both of those moments.
Say that you left the economy in 2010 in a better state than you found it in 1997.
Just a moment, Ian. In the same way that I was asking Ranjit, and I think you should do the same. And then we had a global financial crisis that came along in 2008 and 2009, which was caused by irresponsible behaviour in the banking sector, which precipitated a recession. And of course, this was a global phenomenon.
Which you had failed to regulate properly.
Well, I accept we should have better regulated the banking sector, and we should have ignored the voices in the Conservative Party and other places which were saying we had regulated areas of business too much in that respect. But was the reason for the global financial crash decisions made by domestic government in the UK, which ensured we got proper investment in our education to help our economy grow in the long term, which ensured that we actually had decent public services and an NHS that could help people healthy, and if you're not healthy, you can't contribute economic activity.
You're going off the question now. Ranjit's question was, why has Labour always left the economy in a worse state than it found it? Unemployment has been higher at the end of the Labour government than at the beginning, hasn't it?
I don't accept his interpretation of history. Well, let's look at the government in the 1940s. The Attlee government inherited an economy which was recovering from the war. We were having to rebuild our country. We left our country in a situation in 1950 and 51 than we did in 1945. And I look at the situation in the area that I have been in, and the area, you take London, all of the new Sure Start children's centres we've got here, new and improved schools. I could go through a whole list of things that we changed for the better. I suppose I'd pose the question back to many other people, which is how tangibly has the country changed under a Conservative government? It's got worse.
At the end of a Labour government, unemployment has always been high, because that is actually a fact.
I don't necessarily recognise that as a figure.
Well, it is a fact.
I don't recognise. I mean, the broader question that Ranjit asked: do we always leave the economy worse than we found it? No, I don't accept that.
Ranjit?
Straight answer to a straight question.
Well, I'm afraid he had off for that, and it is true. It's never been left better by a Labour government than when it found it. The thing, can I just say
very quickly?
The times you mentioned, the 97 and 2001 government, when the economy was doing well, they borrowed to the max, so that when the financial crisis did come, they couldn't, to use a metaphor, borrow anymore on their credit card.
Okay, Ranjit, we're going to have to move on because we've only got half an hour. Elizabeth is in Golders Green.
That's wrong, by the way.
Elizabeth.
Oh, good evening, Ian. Good evening, Mr. Umunna. I'd like to ask you about this mansion tax. Can you please tell me how you're going to work it? If you, through no fault of your own, you bought your house years and years ago, like my parents did,
yes,
and it's gone through the roof in value. Now, what happens if you might have a nice house, but you've got no money in the bank?
Well, the way it will work, this mansion tax, is so that we raise money from people who are earning decent money and also have properties worth more than £2 million.
Well, like my mum and dad, they're not here, they've died now, but they weren't...
Yes.
So how would they pay it?
So,
or like hundreds of people in London especially, who had worked hard and bought their houses and through no fault of their own.
Okay, Elizabeth, let Chuka answer the question.
So the second part that I was going to add to what I was saying, Elizabeth, was that the way we will implement this is not in such a way that it would hit people who are asset rich, as your late parents were, but income poor. And so if you're not in the higher income tax bracket, in terms of you're not earning beyond the 40% rate of tax, then you can opt to defer payment of the levy to when your property is sold or transferred. And that way you protect those who aren't earning a lot of money, but obviously have a lot of assets.
Extra inheritance tax, sort of. I mean, in that circumstance.
Well, I wouldn't describe it in that way. And of course, what we're going to do with the money, because obviously, financial time for the public finances, and we've got to balance the books. But equally, we've got to invest in our public services. All of the monies through the mansion tax will go into the NHS, ensuring that elderly people, for example, like your parents were, can actually get the access to the care that they need. And
Elizabeth?
Well, sorry, but I don't agree with that at all, because like Ian said, that's another sort of inheritance tax. I mean, unless you're like your glorious leader and have solicitors to avoid paying it, which he didn't pay. I mean, is your parents' house worth a lot of money? Will you pay tax and mansion tax?
Well, unfortunately, I lost my father when I was 13 a long time ago.
I did.
And on his, in terms of his own assets, I think, absolutely, of course, we paid all the taxes due, including inheritance tax.
Not like your leader, he didn't pay inheritance
Well, hang on just a minute. The second thing I was just going to say about this is that ultimately, we do need to raise funds to fund our public services. And I believe we can apply this in a way that doesn't hit the overwhelming majority of people. And to just put it in context, this is going to affect a very, very small number of properties. We are talking, I think, less than 2% of the properties, because it can raise £2.5 billion that we can then invest in our. Most people are not living in, or would dream of living in, a house that is over £2 million in value. Actually, a lot of properties like that, for example, in London, are often owned by foreign corporations or foreign individuals who...
No, they're not. If you live where I live, they're not. They're people who've worked hard and paid for it.
But I wouldn't say that is necessarily applies to every single high-value property in London.
Near enough.
Well, I don't agree with you on that. I'm not sure that's the case, but we're trying to apply it, and we will apply it in a way that is fair. And we're not trying to hit people.
You will, because I don't think you'll get re-elected. Well, don't think you'll be elected, because this is a terrible tax on people that have worked hard.
Well, it happens to enjoy a huge amount of support across the country from lots of people who've worked hard.
Can I make a comment? Whenever I've heard you talk about the mansion tax, and we've talked about it on the programme before, you don't come across to me as somebody who thinks this is the best tax ever invented, if I can put it like that. There are plenty of your London Labour colleagues, for example, particularly those who are running for mayor, do not like this tax at all. And I know you've got collective responsibility, but I just sort of get the feeling that it's not something that, if you were in charge of this, that you would have necessarily suggested yourself, he says delicately.
I don't agree with your interpretation. But as I said, I didn't go to politics to tax people. I don't think
My point exactly.
People do not enjoy taxing people, and I don't think anybody in the Labour Party enjoys taxing people. But there are lots...
That's sometimes not the impression that's given, though, because
I don't agree with that. And ultimately, the reason you raise tax is so that we can pay for the things that everybody wants, which is a good education, good, decent infrastructure, investing in homes. Those kinds of things don't grow on trees, and we have to raise the money somehow, and you have to get the right balance as well.
Okay.
Because if you weren't to raise any money at all from very wealthy individuals and asking them to pay a little bit more in tax, that means much deeper spending reductions in terms of those things that everybody relies on. And that's the problem George Osborne's got. That's why George Osborne is forecast to be making cuts twice as deep of anything that we've seen in any year of this Parliament over the next 3 years.
You're going to love this next question. Rebecca's in Hendon. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
It's great to be with you. Chuka, I just wanted to ask you, would you say you're more likely to stand as Mayor of London or as the next leader of the Labour Party?
I like the way actually, that's a better question than what Ian would ask. I've got no interest.
You're right, actually.
I've got no interest to be mayor of London.
So you'd rule that out?
We've got some fantastic candidates.
But you would rule that out?
No, I'm not. I don't want to. I completely rule out running for mayor of London. But what I want to be is the business secretary in the next Labour government. And
but in the unlikely event of Labour losing the election, would you run for leader?
I'm just not getting into that conversation at all because it's not about me. It's about the country.
I can't do this. You ask better questions than me.
It's about Labour actually getting in office so we can deliver things. And I think people too often get disillusioned with politics because they think we're all in it for ourselves. And
why do you ask the question, Rebecca?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Chuka, because for what it's worth, I think you'd make a fantastic mayor of London.
No, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you. Joe's in Dulwich. Hello, Joe.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, Chuka. If I may get straight to the question, I just want to know, how do you, Chuka, feel about the last Labour administration as the party that brought in zero-hour contracts and was the first to use privatisation in the NHS? And finally, just one other question. With the tax burden of the mansion tax, as well as 34 billion going out of London for the rest of the country, don't you think London has takes enough of the tax burden? Why do you feel that we still need to tax more? We virtually run the country.
I just ask you, so the second point you made was about privatisation in the NHS, was it, mate?
Yeah, privatisation in the NHS and the fact that you lot brought in these zero-hour contracts.
All right, let me go through all three of those things. So, first of all, Joe, we didn't bring in zero-hours contracts. It is wrong to suggest that we did. Actually...
Well,
just a minute, let me finish. Actually, when we left office, zero-hours contracts were quite a niche contractual arrangement. And I know that because I practiced for the best part of a decade before I was elected as an employment lawyer. They're very unusual and they weren't really used in a widespread fashion in lots of different sectors. But now we have a situation, not only where we have a huge number being used, 1.8 million at least, but we've also got people being exploited under these contracts. And that's why, if we're elected, we're going to ban exploitative zero-hours contracts. So, for example, you know, Ian could have turned up here if LBC had him on a zero-hour contract to do this shift at 7.
I am, kind of.
Well, maybe you are. But he could have had his shift cancelled at short notice because they wanted to put Nick Ferrari on instead.
Yeah, they could do that.
And then he would have paid his travel expenses to get here, etc., and not have been able to get any compensation. Now, particularly if on a very, very low salary, I don't think that is fair. And there's too many examples of people being exploited in that fashion under zero-hours contracts. And that's why we're going to do what none of the other major parties is committed to do and ban exploitative zero-hours contracts. The second thing that you talked about in the NHS, I don't accept that we allowed privatisation to run riot in the NHS during our time in office.
What is PFI if it isn't private sector involvement?
Well, it is private sector involvement in the sense of getting in private monies to help build hospitals, and that was a good thing because there are a lot of hospitals that wouldn't otherwise be there. But it's a question of where you draw the line, and that's why we're going to limit the profits that private contractors contracting with the NHS can make to 5%, because we think you've got to get the right balance. And essentially, the NHS, although I accept in some respects some people argue GP practices are kind of like businesses, but our NHS is not supposed to be a business. It's there to make sure that whatever your circumstances, you can get healthcare free at the point of need, irrespective of how much you earn. And that's why the Labour Party created the NHS. And the final thing was, by the way, Joe, I think we've got to not go down the of setting up different parts of our country against each other or different groups. You see UKIP try and set up different groups of people against each other. You see increasingly, frankly, David Cameron seeking to set up Scotland against England, which I think is utterly distasteful. And ultimately, we all need to walk together in the same direction because we are actually, as a country, as a UK, trying to compete with emerging market economies like China with its 1.3 billion people. And I think the best way we can do that is not only working in a unified fashion in the UK, but also strongly engaged with Europe. I don't think that if other parts of our country gain in whatever fashion, that's a bad thing for London. I think we gain and vice versa. I often get a lot of people, actually, Joe, complaining to me in other parts of the country.
Joe, very quickly.
Go on, sorry, Joe. I'm going on. Sorry.
It sounds to me like this Labour administration's job is to repair the damage done by the last Labour administration, which you don't want to accept. And secondly, we're over 40 billion coming out of London every single year, normally to pay for the rest of the country. You and your party still believe that mansion tax is required to tax us even more. What is it that you don't like about London, or what is it? Just because there's a few more rich people in London?
Well, Joe, I'm a Londoner. I don't accept that we screwed everything up in our country. There's Sure Start children's centres in every constituency in this country. There are safer neighbourhood teams in every ward. There are hundreds of thousands of people benefiting from a national minimum wage. We actually actually left our NHS with record low waiting times. You look at our schools, primary and secondary schools, fundamentally in a different position to that we found them in 2010. I just do not recognise that we screwed up the country in the way that you're suggesting.
A quick question on a speech you've made today. You say you want quotas for black and ethnic minorities in the boardroom. Why?
That's not quite what I said, and it was actually an interview I gave today, and I was asked what I thought we should be thinking about in terms of a target and what should be our aspiration for our boardrooms. Now, we've done really well, and full credit to my opposite number, Vince Cable, working with the Labour Lord Mervyn Davies in increasing gender diversity in the boardroom, certainly in respect of non-executive directors. There are not nearly enough women. We're around 23%. The aspiration of this government was 25%, and I want to, if I'm
9% when they took over.
Exactly, and we need, that's why I'm showering praise on a Liberal Democrat minister. But I also think we need to look at the ethnic diversity of our boardrooms too. It cannot be right that, frankly, we've only had two black and minority ethnic CEOs in the FTSE 100. Tidjane Thiam, a superb operator who is about to leave Prudential and join Credit Suisse First Boston, and Ivan Menezes, who is the CEO of Diageo. We're not really tapping in beyond the numbers, some of the small numbers we've seen. Half of our FTSE 100 companies don't have any non-white directors. And if you think what our diaspora communities bring our country in terms of links to the outside world, to India, these emerging market economies in Africa, we are not tapping into that in the boardroom, which is crazy when we're in our fourth decade of a trade deficit. And one important thing, I'm not saying, a lot of people say, yes, but of course you should appoint on merit. And I agree you should appoint on merit. But if you take that argument to the nth degree, you are basically saying there aren't enough women and there aren't enough people of colour in the boardroom because there aren't enough that merit appointment. I'm sorry, that does not stack up in 2015.
Remember, you can watch us at lbc.co.uk. Let's go to Paul in the Barbican. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Ian. Good evening.
Hi, what would you like to say?
My point to you is corporation tax. What is Labour's stand on that when they get elected, if they get elected?
Ian, we're committed to...
Paul,
I'm so sorry. Since I'm looking at Ian Dell's face here, and that's the first name that comes. Paul, we are committed to having the lowest rate of corporation tax in the G7.
We already have that.
And we're committed to continuing to have the lowest rate of corporation tax.
That's a weasel word answer, because you know full well that you could raise the level of corporation tax and still have the lowest in the G7.
But that's not our policy, and actually we supported...
Why didn't you say that then?
Well, I've just said it, haven't I?
No, but you're giving yourself wiggle room to raise it. That's my point.
I've just said that that's not our policy. And, of course, we've supported all the reductions in corporation tax to 21 pence. Now, the question was whether you went further with a further 1 penny reduction in corporation tax for large companies, or whether you directed the resources you were going to use to do that to help small companies.
I've got two small little pubs.
Brilliant.
And the good thing for Labour, I pay the minimum. The minimum wage I pay for my staff is £8 when they start. But the average wage I pay my staff is about £10.25.
What's your rateable value?
And I've got two pubs.
Right. Is it less in each case? Would you say it's less than £50,000?
Look, I don't want to go into that. Let's stick with corporation tax. Do you fear that the corporation tax will be put up by Labour? Is that the reason that you're asking the question, Paul?
Absolutely, yeah. And not only that, national insurance as well.
Well, we've ruled out increasing national insurance, and what we're doing instead of the further cut in corporation tax from 21 to 20p is actually using that money to cut business rates for small businesses. And the reason I asked what the rateable value was of your two pubs, Paul, was to find out, because if so, you would be benefiting from the cut to the business rates we will implement this financial year, and the freeze
left, so
the further financial year.
Paul, thank you. Alex is in Edgware. Hello, Alex.
Hi, Chuka. Hope you're well.
I'm good, Alex. How are you?
I recall you. Yeah, I'm good. Remember bumping into you in the 2010 campaign back in Streatham. Good to have you there. You've said some interesting things tonight, but my question is really about the comment of a Tory peer this evening that talking up the SNP in the way that the Conservatives has could damage Britain PLC. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. Is this scare tactic really working for England? Because I think that's effectively what it is.
I don't think so, because I think the British people reject the politics of division and scaremongering. I think that's why UKIP have not found as much resonance this year as they did last year, because ultimately their politics has been exposed. And I think the Conservative campaign is struggling, not least because they haven't learnt that if you seek to divide and engage in nasty politics, it's not a way of winning votes. I think privately, the Prime Minister's interests coincide with Nicola Sturgeon's. I think his behaviour since the referendum, the Scottish independence referendum back in September, would seem to indicate that this is a man who is intensely relaxed about the breakup of the UK so long as it serves Conservative Party political interests. Because I can't think why he is so determined to talk up the prospect of the SNP doing well.
But he doesn't need to talk it up, does it? Because they are. They're going to deny you a majority. That's what's going to happen, isn't it?
I tell you, Alex, the person who I think has been speaking a lot of sense on this in the last 24 hours is the last Conservative Scottish Secretary, Lord Forsyth, who has roundly condemned his leader and the current Prime Minister from talking up the prospect of an SNP victory. And what really infuriated me, beyond belief, frankly, the Scottish referendum, was the way in which the Prime Minister sought to go back on his word in relation to the vow of further devolution in Scotland. Nothing has done more to lose support for the Union and the UK in Scotland than his behaviour after that. Well, in the end, he didn't. But the language that he used suggested that he was going to renege on it. And Michael Forsyth, the former Conservative Scottish Secretary, absolutely backs up what I've just said.
Right. Just quick final question on this terrible situation in the Mediterranean. What would you like to see the British government do to maybe be part of a rescue effort?
Well, I think we should devote as much resource as possible and have a proper EU search and rescue operation. That's the first thing. Secondly, at EU level, we need to do more to tackle the people traffickers, and we can work and collaborate with other authorities across the EU to do that. And then thirdly, through our foreign and aid policy, ultimately we need to help stabilise the situation in the countries from which people are coming from. But this was a appalling and is an ongoing tragic situation. And ultimately, the international community and the EU in particular must act, because you can only do this, I think, at that kind of supranational level, given all our waters are policed by different forces.
Chuka, thank you very much indeed. That's Labour's Chuka Umunna, their Shadow Business Secretary. Tomorrow on our election call, we have UKIP's Suzanne Evans. On Thursday, it's Nick Clegg's turn. We'll also be having a Conservative politician as well during the course of the week. This is LBC. It's 7:32. News headlines with Rupert Bhatia.
European leaders are holding an emergency summit to address the migrant boat crisis as authorities tackle further emergencies in the Mediterranean. Italy and Malta are responding to